Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Bryan Sapot, CEO of Mingo Smart Factory, a smart factory platform that leverages technology to solve complex problems in the manufacturing industry. Bryan, I'm so glad to chat with you, not only because you have such a wealth of knowledge in building companies, being that some of them have been successful exits, some of them not so much. So I know you've learned so much in your career and would love to get your insight and what works, what doesn't work, but also manufacturing, this whole kind of ecosystem, I think it's becoming a little bit more present and popular, at least media and news as countries and things change around manufacturing, but also as technology continues to advance and what that means for workforce and doing things efficiently and effectively in our modern day today. But before we get into all that good stuff, what were you doing before you started Mingo Smart Factory?
I'm one of those afflicted entrepreneurs. Like I started many companies when I was younger, but my first real company that was enduring, I started when I was 23. So it was a custom software company that built ERP systems, just like back office systems to run manufacturing companies. Actually, my first customer was a chocolate manufacturer. So I kind of just stepped into it. Yeah.
What was it? It was a manufacturing job that happenstance because that was your customer, or were you around the industry for your family in there or your friends, or did you get an introduction, or was it just because your first client was a manufacturer?
It was, so my now ex-wife worked at a chocolate manufacturer, and she would come home and explain and complain about their software systems and say how screwed up they were and they didn't work right and it crashed all the time. And I'm a 23-year-old tech guy working at a residential real estate company. And I'm like, I can fix that, right? I can fix that. I can rewrite a whole system, right? No problem. So she got me a meeting with the owner and I won that deal. I beat out SAP and Oracle. I found out why a couple of years later. We were order of magnitude cheaper. And he's like, I'll just try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, whatever. It wasn't that expensive. And so just her working there and me getting that deal launched now a 6-year career in manufacturing software.
And you kind of think about, and a lot of founders have that kind of first customer story where whether it's a pricing thing or someone wants to take a chance and they want to kind of create that relationship, that's one piece of the puzzle, but executing on that and actually completing objectives, those goals, those agreements that you set up with clients is probably the hardest part of that challenge after getting into the door. And how were you able to, in your career, kind of not only conceptualize their business goals and outcomes, but also complete the task in the amount of time? Because that's a challenge, right? Especially if you're first starting off on something, it's almost like an MVP. You don't necessarily know how it's going to work out, but you have a strong hypothesis. What did work out? What did you kind of learn in that experience?
Yeah. So a lot of things worked out. So I think I just kind of knew it. I don't know. My whole family owned their own businesses. Like my dad did, my uncles, my grandparents. Like you were the odd person out if you were working for somebody else. So I understood what it took to really run and build a business and how hard you had to work. And I think it just intuitively, the owner was like, I needed to do all of these different things. And I was like, great, I just kind of understood. And I think I don't give up, which is it's a strong point for me, but maybe it's a weak point, and maybe I should move on to other things, but I pushed through all kinds of different stuff. We grew that company. I owned it for 18 years. When I sold it, I think we were 35 employees 7 years ago, and it just kind of worked out. We got lucky, hired some really good people along the way, and developed something pretty cool. Because we focus primarily on mid-sized manufacturing companies and doing ERP, CRM, websites, all that stuff, and really helping them optimize their businesses and improve really everything. Profitability, sales.
Yeah. And thinking about just that company and also running Mingo, and I know you were involved in other projects as well. How did you kind of manage not only running one company, but having other things on the side? Were they at the same time, or were there other ventures that you had kind of accomplished beforehand? What was that kind of relationship with those other companies that you were working on?
They were always kind of under the same umbrella. Like one, I'd be focusing on more than the other. Like I built a company called Datix Real Estate Solutions that happened when manufacturing was slow. And actually the company had shrunk down to just me And I
Wow.
used kind of that residential real estate background to build like Wix or whatever you want to call it for real estate agents, and one of the
Yeah.
first like mapping tools and stuff like that. So it was never multiple at the same time. It was always either, hey, we're focusing on going hard in manufacturing, or that went soft. So, hey, let's go hard on real estate, and then came back in manufacturing. Manufacturing stuff was always interesting because it's the marrying of the physical and the virtual.
Yeah.
Where you're building software, which is virtual, to help people build physical things. And it's also pretty complex as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of what you needed to.
Yeah. And one thing I talk to a lot of founders who do have that environment where they're building software, but for physical machinery. And that relationship is a challenge, at least in my mind, thinking about the traditional method not traditional, but the method that people are more popularized in terms of how they're building companies with just software. Everything's on a platform, everything's in the cloud. But the relationship between digital and physical, how do you overcome that in the sense of making it such a seamless experience and not being so disjointed and disconnected, which a lot of softwares are, that you kind of have that relationship with the digital and physical? What are some ways that you've built and seeing a bit of strategy around building that leads to the success of it? What would you attribute that to?
Yeah, we built a lot of technology that's behind the scenes to help make that really seamless.
Yeah.
Like we have these little gateways, which are small PCs that go in every single plant that run all this code. They run Linux, and then they run a bunch of code that we wrote on top of it to handle talking to all these different machines. Cause there's like, when you walk into a factory, it's not all brand new, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's stuff from the 1920s all the way up to stuff that they bought last year. And you got to figure out how to light all this up. And they all talk all kinds of different protocols. And so we had to write just tons of code to be able to do that. And then how do you manage the devices? How do you configure them remotely? How do you make sure that they're secure? How do you monitor something from the 1920s were a little ridiculous, but the 60s is legit. Like there's a lot of stuff out there from the 60s. So we found some off the shelf technology and combined it with some special sauce from us to make it seamless. So like somebody can set up a machine now in 15 minutes. Like it's pretty, and depending on what kind it is, and we focus on certain industries, so we know them really well. We have very detailed instructions on how to set those things up to make that process, like you said, easier and smoother, because it's not just logging into a website and using a CRM system. Like you gotta get the machine online. A lot of times you have to have an iPad. You have to train an operator, like the person that's running the machine, on how to use the software, make sure that data is correct, that they put into it if they're not getting it automatically. Like it's a lot of damn work.
Yeah. But thinking about, do you find yourself in the position where there's a lot of old machines that have no software that you can incorporate into it? Have you had to build kind of hardware around that to help not only analyze and track and essentially accept all these inputs to then be able to communicate with the machine? Is that ever the case?
Yeah, we never built any hardware. We always tried to stay away from that because of the expense, but we use these like little off the shelf hockey pucks that this sensor company makes in Minnesota. And you put some wire on here and then you can wire it in the machine. Doesn't use Wi-Fi. It uses like some other technology, but it makes it really, really easy. And it's from a company that all the maintenance people in these manufacturing plants understand. So when you say, hey, I'm using this banner engineering thing to connect to your machine, they're like, oh yeah, we like banners. Great. And so it made it really seamless versus like, who's this startup? What are they making? How do I know this isn't going to blow my machine up? So, but that was a big thing to overcome, because it's like, there's a zillion different ways that you could solve this. And what's the simplest way to do it? And like our thing was, what's the minimum amount of data we could pull from a machine? And then build software around it to make it really meaningful. So that's what we did. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's really simple. Sometimes you guys only pull one data point off of a machine, but we can get this ocean of information and run it through an AI and get insights. But it turned out most of that was bullshit. And the single data point thing works really well. Sometimes simple is better.
Right.
So that's how we've done that.
And how much of manufacturing do you have to be just aware of or know and be knowledgeable of to be able to, I feel like a lot of it is marrying the workflow processes. Of course, it's getting the technology to communicate with one another, but if you think about user experience, you must know or have to know a certain degree of manufacturing processes to be able to make that even a more of a seamless process. You kind of consider that in terms of manufacturing workflows and marrying that with software and what are challenges around that as they're not traditionally, they don't work in tandem all the time, right?
I think you hit it on the head there. the thing that you have to know is that people are the hardest part of this whole process, right? Because when people work in manufacturing, right? So like if you read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or something, you might think that robots are taking over and everything is automated and stuff like that, but that's not really the case. In a lot of places, there are a lot of robotics, but there's still people running those. And so, they're making whatever they're making, right? Like remotes or something, or plastic pieces. And there's a person that is interacting with that process. So you can't take them away from the value added activities they're doing to put data into your system. So how do I make that just so simple, limited amount of things, like just one data point, right? I just push this to be able to make this work. And I think that's where the manufacturing knowledge comes from. So like that 20 something years of helping develop these custom systems for manufacturers and watching what they deal with and how hard it is to run these machines and keep up the way you need to, gave us a lot of insight on how to simplify those interfaces to get good data from them and not really disrupt anything. Because if you don't get good data from the people on the floor, the rest of it doesn't matter. Right. And it's garbage out.
Yeah. And thinking about just talk to another, or just founders in general, it's interesting to think about how your go-to-market strategy is in regards to the stakeholders you're going to communicate with. Did you already have an idea, being that you've had all this manufacturing insight, into who you would be speaking with, who has the biggest pain problems, and how they can then, because it's incorporated in such a large team, communicate the value or the operation or the systems behind what you're implementing? Who are the stakeholders? Was it hard to kind of identify them? And what approach do you take? Do you take a bottom-up approach or go to the operators in terms of who kind of oversees everything? Did you know that initially? And how was that kind of discovery process, and who would affect the most and be able to be a best champion? I think that's the buzzword we all kind of look for.
Yeah, it was a bit of a journey. Like originally I thought CEOs would be the way to go. And in smaller companies, that makes sense. But the reality is when you get, like a lot of manufacturing companies are part of a larger conglomerate. Like there's 10 companies rolled up into a holding company. They're all a little bit different. If you go to the CEO of the holding company, that person doesn't care about what happens on the factory floor. Not really. I mean, they do, they care about the outcomes, but they don't care about the day to day. So it took us a couple of years to realize that really who we're going after is the COO, VP of manufacturing, VP of operations, plant manager, like that group of people. And then the other hard part of this, because manufacturing is really broad, right? It encompasses everything from oil refining to making food and dog food and stuff like that. And there's a lot of similarities in all the different types of manufacturing, but then the differences are what make the difference. If that makes any sense, it's what kills you from a product perspective. So like for us, honing in on where do we fit really well? That took us a little bit longer than even the title. So I'd say about 3 or 4 years ago, we figured out that food, auto parts, and plastics, so like kind of these higher volume things, were really where we fit well. Where there's other companies that like custom manufacturing, aerospace, like smaller production runs, they fit better there.
And it's so fascinating thinking about just the relationship, or the change of manufacturing, especially in the last few years. Obviously, larger companies are being more constrained to have things kind of in the US or more kind of shore side. Have you seen a huge dramatic shift in manufacturing in regards to not only the amount of resources allocated to it, but also the workforce? And how has that changed in terms of it improving in your eyes in terms of becoming more operationally efficient, or are we seeing a decrease in activity? What are the changes you're seeing for us that are ordering our products at Amazon, receiving them, and don't really know what the mechanics of what's being built behind everything?
Yeah. So, onshoring, that one's an interesting discussion too, that we can talk about, but I'll talk about what we've seen in the workforce with our customer base. Even before COVID, people were hard to hire in manufacturing. The pay wasn't that great. People viewed it as a low skill job that didn't have a lot of opportunity ahead of it. COVID made that worse, right? So less people wanted to do that. What we saw with our customers were they dramatically increased wages, dramatically. Some of them tripled what they were paying entry-level people. And what they found was, interestingly, they got better people by paying that much. Turnover went down, right? And in reality, they're paying more for labor, but they have better people, so they get better productivity. Turnover goes down, so they don't have to train them as much. They don't have to train new people all the time. And it's been a lot better. the folks who did not increase salaries like that didn't see those benefits.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing is every single company is talking about automation, right? So kind of like robots taking over everything, but just like incremental things. Like how do we, any kind of highly repetitive task that a human is doing, it's not really using what people do best, right? Like problem solving skills, being able to fit maybe things that don't perfectly fit together. We're good at that. Robots are not. They have to be perfectly aligned, stuff like that. But those things that are highly repetitive, how do we automate those? We're seeing more and more people try to do that. And it's becoming a bigger and bigger priority for them.
Yeah. And then in terms of onshoring, I know you touched on it a little bit, but just thinking about that whole shift, are we seeing a lot more increase in activity and productivity? And also this is actually just a curious question. Does one manufacturer make multiple items for multiple different kind of distributors and that, or do you see a lot of factories are specialized?
They're specialized, but they always have different customers. So we can talk about onshoring real quick. So what we saw with COVID, right, with all the supply chain issues is a lot of people left basically Asia and they started bringing stuff back to Mexico and the United States and looking for other things in our hemisphere, other places that they could do similar manufacturing. Mexico was a big one. We had a lot of customers who bought plants, built plants, grew capacity in Mexico, but then we're also seeing a lot of folks do it in the US as well, depending on different factors, right? Like labor costs, raw materials, all that kind of stuff. So it is growing really, really quickly. And most manufacturers, a lot of times they have multiple customers. Sometimes they don't. We work with a decent amount of contract packaging companies in food. So they'll have like 10 different customers that they package different food products for. Automotive, sometimes, yes, many customers, sometimes 90% of their product is sold to a single manufacturer. Yeah. It's kind of all over the place.
Yeah. I can imagine it's such a diverse kind of customer pool to have to cater to and build unique solutions for, even within, I'm sure, a structured solution that you're building now. I know we talked a lot about manufacturing, but shifting towards Mingo, what essentially was the inspiration behind? I know you've been building software for manufacturing companies, but why kind of focus and really focus on creating more complex solutions for this industry and diving deeper into this sector, which is, I think you mentioned mid-market manufacturing companies. What kind of inspired you to solve these problems around efficiency and processes, more so than just setting up systems as you were before, like ERPs and CRMs, which are obviously great for data collection and keeping things kind of on track. But the intelligence piece, I feel like from what I've learned about Mingo, is really where the next level is in improving processes and really knowing about data in an intricate way. What made you double down on that direction? And what's been kind of exciting for you to be further deep into offering these solutions?
So this will sound a little bit weird, but the reason why I started it was finger pointing. So if you walk into most manufacturing plants, right, it's almost every day is kind of a firefight. Like there's different problems that happen that have to be solved. And there's always a lot of finger pointing. So the person that runs the machine will say, the maintenance guy didn't do his job. My machine keeps breaking down. Right. And then the maintenance guy goes, no, the guy running the machine doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He keeps breaking the machine and I have to fix it. And then some engineer comes over and says, no, neither one of you know what you're talking about. It's actually this problem. So it's all like finger pointing. And it's all gut feel, right? Okay. And the loudest voice in the room wins, always. And they may not be right. So I was like, and I saw this all the time. We implemented ERP systems at like hundreds of different manufacturing companies. I saw it constantly. And I got sick of it. It's like, you guys, there's data that can tell you what the problem is, right? And we actually built some custom that did that. So how do we give them information and data to say, okay, actually, this is where the problem's coming from. Now we can all focus on this particular issue and fix it. And then it's going to go away rather than all this finger pointing between everybody. That was one of the biggest driving factors of it. Yeah. The other one was nobody had automated data collection on the factory floor. And even today, almost all of our customers, like 98% of our customers go from nothing, meaning like paper and Excel, to something, us or a competitor. It's like the final frontier for technology, right? Like automated data collection. And it's truly unbelievable. Like it's like you're blind and you put glasses on and you're like, holy shit, I can see. You know what I mean? Yeah. And every day the data is used and they can go and say, okay, yesterday was not a good day. Here's the reasons why yesterday was not a good day. These are our top 3 priorities that we're going to work on to fix those problems. They go off and do it. And then you just constantly see this increase in efficiency, right?
Yeah.
Eventually it'll top out. There's only so much you can do before you have to throw heavy money at it. But it was really those 2 things. Like, how do we provide visibility into what's happening every day? How do we stop the firefighting? How do we stop the finger pointing? And it's really what gets me excited because it worked.
Yeah.
Like, I went all over the Midwest last week speaking with customers, and to see like their graphs and to see, we do this metric called OEE, which measures effectiveness of a manufacturing process.
Yeah.
And we go, hey, have you guys seen any improvements? And they pull up a chart inside of our software and it goes like this, up and to the right. And it's like, how'd you do that? Well, we just look at it every day in our production meetings and stuff like that. It just gets me fired up. Right.
Yeah. Why is it so underserved? Why has the technology not been implemented? It seems like such a crucial and also such a large company that you need sophisticated instruments. And maybe that's a newer philosophy. We don't care. Why is it so underserved? And why are so many companies behind in having automatic data collection?
I think it's because it's hard to do right. Right.
Yeah.
So there have been systems that have existed for a really long time to do this stuff for certain industries. Like if you walk into a plant like Procter and Gamble, where they make bleach or detergent of some kind, they have one. It's instrumented. It's crazy, but it's wildly complex. And you have to have an army of folks maintaining that thing, but that doesn't work for 100 million widget manufacturer. So how do you simplify something that does something really complicated down to, I only need to put these little inputs into this, and then I get this wealth of information out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that was the hardest thing to solve.
Yeah.
And it's like before tablets, before cell phones blew up, like the technology to do that cheaply, effectively didn't exist.
Yeah.
I think now it does. The other part of it is people, and they still say this, I haven't had it for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, right? Why do I need it? I've run a profitable company. Everything is great, right?
Right.
Competitor has it and they're going to crush you. So I mean, that's the reason why, but there's still that real old school mentality. Plus you have to prove it to them. I mean, manufacturers are very practical people. They're like, I got to know that I'm going to see the ROI on this investment. Like, how do you prove that to me?
Yeah.
And we can do that, but people are still very skeptical.
Sure. I think one thing I love about talking to founders, and you in particular, it's like the perfect marriage between you happen to work at this company, so the industry with this industry intimately, so you have this knowledge, but you're a little bit of an auxiliary figure in regards to what are your incentives, but you see all these problems, and then as technology kind of grows and expands, it becomes more sophisticated, cheaper, more easy to use. It's like this really like big bang kind of statistical anomaly for founders, but you see this in common experiences. So it's amazing to see that it was just such a unique set of variables that allowed Mingo to not only become a company, but also you to really intimately know the challenges that they face. And I'm curious, just thinking about external and thinking about internally, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face today?
The biggest challenge we face today is still, I think it's sales growth. It's probably the same as every other startup because we all want to grow, right? As fast as possible. How do we reach all of these people? And then how do we get them to understand the value that exists here and what they're really missing out on?
Yeah.
So the market's massive, but you break it down into little niches, right? And it's not that big as you go after each one. That's kind of what we do. We kind of want to dominate a couple of markets and then move on to another. And that's one of our biggest challenges because the people that have it, they love it. You couldn't pry it from their cold, dead hands.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so about going kind of the way you're going about it, dominating a market and transitioning, is that because every market has its unique problem set and then you can kind of expand and go to the next problem set? Because I can imagine if you go too wide, then it's hard to identify maybe a really structured and efficient system for one of the sectors. Is that kind of on point or?
Yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of our philosophy about the software. It's 80% out of the box. And then we give you the tools to customize to what makes you unique with the remaining 20%, right?
Right.
Well, if you focus on, let's say brewing, right? That remaining 20% now shrinks to probably about 5. And we know like what brewing needs. We know what packaging needs. We know what stamping needs. And so it really shrinks. And so your time to value is a lot shorter in those markets that you really, really understand than it is if you were to jump over to something like, I don't know, construction adhesives or something.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
we do that too, but the gap just gets a little bit bigger. And it's a pretty tight network of people within these industries, right?
Mhm.
So they have trade associations, they go to the same places, talk to the same people, use the same vendors. And so you can use that as social proof to more of that belief in the ROI. Well, like my buddy Bob's got it, so it must be good. So I'm going to press it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Time to value that's something that hasn't been spoken about a lot, but I can see he decreased the amount of I guess, customization per each problem set. It does increase that. That's pretty cool to think about a company that can expand and can be so widely used, but to do it well, you got to do it kind of incrementally. Thinking about Mingo in long term, if everything goes well, what's the long term vision for the company?
Just grow it as big as I can.
Yeah.
And then one day sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like this. It's fun. I love walking into manufacturing plants. Like it fires me up. I like to see how stuff is made. I like to help people improve those processes. I like to understand what their problems are and then how do we improve that stuff with software. Right. And I think there's kind of limitless growth here.
Yeah.
And there's room for multiple players in this market. And
Yeah.
I want to do it for as long as it's interesting or somebody comes along with a really big check.
Yeah. 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 Totally. Yeah. I love this next section. I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions and we'll see where we go. So first question, I always like to open it up is, what's particularly hard about your job?
Well, the hardest thing that I find, and it'd be interesting to know what your other guests have said, is how do you prioritize your time as a CEO of the company, right?
Yeah.
How do you make sure you're not too down in the weeds? How do you make sure you're not too head in the clouds? Like, where's the right place to be and support the team? That's my biggest challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. You've echoed probably the majority of founders is the prioritization piece. And interesting to ask you, what are some ways that you prioritize or what are some strategies that you've used even just day to day, time blocking or allocating certain days for certain tasks? What's been helpful for you to identify what to prioritize on even day to day in your workflow?
Yeah, I try like every Monday I block off 2 hours. Like I don't until 10 o'clock, like I don't talk to anybody. I don't return emails or anything like that unless it's urgent.
Yeah.
And I plan out what's going to happen during the week. And I more time block than anything else, but I do create a to-do list and I try to prioritize it in terms of what's going to drive revenue and what's going to make sure that we don't have churn, right? How do we keep customers?
Yeah.
And that's really how I prioritize my time. But there's a lot of stuff under that, right? So like growth and revenue is, okay, what's the roadmap for the future? Churn is making sure we go visit customers and hearing what they need, prioritizing their feature requests, make sure we don't have bugs, like all of these different nitty gritty. But if it doesn't fall within those two things, I try not to do it and get somebody else to.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And thinking about just your industry in particular, one thing that's interesting to me, we talked about robots are taking over jobs and kind of that whole philosophy, but I think more so what we've seen, at least with AI and the popularity gaining because of ChatGPT and Midjourney and all these other tools, is that it's not necessarily that it'll take over a certain job function, but I think it'll take over the monotonous parts of a job and also kind of help be work useful in tandem with some of the actual natural skill set and just kind of ease into whether it's like writer's block and decreasing that kind of function of the job or just being able to do things more efficiently, more effectively. What will you be seeing or what will we be experiencing in manufacturing are seeing that there's better paid workers, they're more qualified. Is it just going to create this tandem experience even more so of intimacy between a person who's operating machines and technology? And if the technology even get more sophisticated, what will we be seeing? Will we see robots everywhere? Will we see people everywhere? What will we be seeing when we look into what's building and making the things that we use every day?
I think you're going to see more and more automation and robots. They may not be the robots that you think about, you see pictures of. They could just be more automated machinery, stuff like that, more flexible machinery. Yeah. And more people are driving to, like you said, repetitive tasks. Let's remove the repetitive tasks. What are the things robots do really well? And then what are things people do really well? They solve problems, right? We're very adaptable machines, if you will. Yeah. We'll see more and more of that. On the On the AI side of things, there's a ton of different areas that's going to come into play, like from a product design, manufacturability, scheduling, routing, optimization within the plant. Even with we're all about like, how do you create efficiencies inside of the plant? Like where are all the problems coming from? What's really slowing you down? So having tools that highlight those things automatically, so you don't have to have engineers coming up with a hypothesis, digging through the data to try to figure it out. Mingo just goes, here, this is why you lost so much capacity yesterday, and just points you to what it thinks is the root cause. And then you can go off and take action on that. And we even think in the future, you could feed the corrective action. Like, what did you do to fix this problem back into the system? And then we start recommending solutions based on what you're doing.
Yeah, you got to really think about then the proactive part, because then that increase, it's almost like the Airbnb experience as it was described in the past, where it's how can we get someone throughout the whole journey with as little inputs as possible to get to that, to get that goal or that experience. But it sounds like that kind of the evolution of Mingo in the direction it's headed. Thinking about just like founders who are in that scaling phase, they found product market fit. They've gone 0 to 1, they're looking to go from 1 to 10. I know you've done it quite over and over again with a few companies and even with Mingo now. What's some advice you would give to founders who are trying to build a mature company? What are the key components it needs to have to then be able to tap into the scaling? Because I think along the way to building an MVP, there are some I don't want to say shortcuts, but there's some compromises you make in terms of operational efficiency or structure of your team and things like that. But seeing that you've seen success and it continue to scale and grow, what are some things that founders should focus on as earlier on in their company, now that you have all this experience and knowledge that you've gained over time?
I think if you have a strong vision for where you want to go and you listen to your customers, that's the most important thing. Like happy customers are the number one most important thing, right? Yeah. And if you can figure out a cohort of those people, like so our industry niches, and make them happy, and you'll crush it. I mean, the customers what matters to me at the end of the day. They bring home revenue in the door, they tell their friends, they go to different companies, they buy your product. I mean, it's pretty simple, but straightforward. That's what I would focus on. And if you're still getting customers and they're happy and they're signing multi-year agreements, but you don't feel like you're growing fast enough because your investors say you're not growing fast enough, fuck that. Just keep going. You have happy customers. It will work itself out. They will lead you down the path. You got to have a good vision and understand where you're going, but they will lead you down the path to success as long as the market's big enough.
Yeah. As well as that, I think founders talked about a lot of the investor pressures and expectation, but those who have the mindset thinking about their customers, I think have a better, at least a reflection of the success of their business. More customers, more contracts, and the growth kind of continues. The size of it's going to change, the timing of it's always going to change, but the seeing the key things and being aware of them is extremely important. I love to ask this question because go ahead, please.
I fell into the trap a little bit of, we're not growing fast enough. Look at this company in this other industry, but we're not them, right? Yeah. Like we're not, I forgot, what my example was, like HubSpot or something like that saw pretty good growth and then boom, they went through the roof.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll ever be us. Our market's not that big. You have hardware component. It's a little bit more complicated than what they're doing. It's just, you are who you are, and you got to judge your growth and what you're doing based on your industry and your business, not somebody else's. Not everybody's going to be Stripe and Airbnb and Uber.
Yeah. It's a great point. The next question, I was really excited I always love to ask founders this because I think founders have a unique way to extract knowledge out of anything that they ingest, whether it's early in your career or now. What books or people have been highly influential to you?
The books, these are relatively recent, but one that I absolutely loved and I use what I learned in it a lot is Never Split the Difference.
Yeah.
Do you know that one?
Yeah, I've been a majority of it, but I haven't finished the book.
It's good. The other one that I really liked was Ray Dalio's first book, which I'm blanking on the name.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
But just the way that he talked about using data and also judging advice that you get, and this is good for startup founder advice too. When somebody gives you advice about what you should do, you really need to understand if they're qualified to be telling you what to do. Like what's their background in a similar situation that would lead them to be an expert that could really help you. And a lot of times it's way outside. Maybe they were a VP at some Fortune 500 company. That does not apply to a 20-person startup for the most part, right? So
Yeah.
you kind of have to weigh that feedback. So there's a lot of that in Principles. That's the name of the book that I really, I really liked. The influential people in my life, anybody would know, but my very first boss and his boss at my first like real job were huge and instrumental in kind of shaping my career and where I got today. My first customer, the guy that ran that one, same thing. I learned a lot about business from him because I'm 23 at that point. But yeah, I mean, there's been tons of people along the way that I've learned from, but those three early in my career really shaped kind of the way I do things and think about the world of business.
Yeah. I love the piece you mentioned. I just had a conversation with one of my brothers about the qualifications, like make sure whoever you're getting advice as either has done something similar or more impressive than what you've accomplished, and that they would have done it as somewhat of a similar route, or at least have an anecdote that you can compare it to. Because you're so right. If they have been in a different position or in a different, completely incentive-based role, the advice isn't the same. And you got to take it with a grain of salt. And if they're telling you what to do from a business standpoint, hey, you know your customers, and you should know more about it than most, in my philosophy. Yeah.
But then it's also hard to like, how do you, like a lot of times take on a new investor, they'll kind of give us a bunch of ideas. Like, have you done this? Have you done this? And it's like, we're 7 years old, right? So we've kind of done it all at this point. It doesn't mean the market hasn't shifted and we should try again, but it's like, how do you balance with, okay, somebody's telling me maybe we should do channel partnerships. Well, we tried that twice. It doesn't work so far. Should we do it again? Is it the right way to do it? It's always hard to judge that advice and feedback. I struggle with that, but Ray's framework in there, I thought was a good one.
Yeah, it is a good one. Always like to ask this question before. I know we're coming to the close of the episode, and I want to give you a chance to give us your plug and let us know where we can find and support not only you as a founder, but Mingo. Is there any question I didn't ask you that I should have, or that you would have liked to answer? Anything that we missed and anything that we left on the table?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of good ground here.
Yeah. Well, Bryan, it's been such an incredible time, not only learning about your background, your experience, what success you've had, the different challenges you faced, but also Mingo and also the transition and the evolution of manufacturing, the needs that it faces, and way that really it could be interjected with a lot of technology that's already available that they just aren't using currently to build more efficient processes and create stronger, not only productivity, but also stronger, I'm sure, experiences for their customers and things like that. So it was such a pleasure learning all that from you, especially getting some advice. Last little bit, where can we find you? Where can we find Mingo? Give us your LinkedIn's, your websites, your Twitters. Where can we be a supporter of you in the product building?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, Bryan Sapot. I'm the only Bryan Sapot. So feel free to connect with me, and gomingo.io. So Mingo Smart Factory. Anybody knows anybody who runs a manufacturing plant, needs better data, better visibility into what's happening day to day, we can help with that.
Amazing, Bryan. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you so much for being on the show today.
That was great. Thank you, Julian.
Good.